we have a broad label called nonverbal, which is suggesting that just because the person can speak, they can think, as you rightly pointed out. And it's just a fallacy which is so ingrained in institutions and schools with therapists, because there aren't that many counterexamples that exist to really defy this idea.
For many non-speaking autistic people, communication isn't a matter of language or intelligence. It's a matter of access. What happens when we presume competence? And how can typing open the door to a world that's been hidden in plain sight? Viraj Dhanda is a non-speaking autistic student who, after being diagnosed with autism and apraxia as a young child, found his voice through typing. His journey ultimately led him to MIT's class of 2029. And along with his father, Sumit, he's helping to redefine what it means to communicate, learn, and be understood. That's straight ahead on episode 292. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
You know, this podcast has always been a bit of a passion project for us. It started with a simple idea: make conversations about neurodiversity more accessible, more human, and more hopeful. And honestly, the best part has been hearing how these episodes resonate with you, how they spark reflection or change the way you see your kids, your students, or even yourself. What really keeps it all going, though, is this community. When you subscribe, leave a review, or share an episode with a friend, it helps more people discover the show and feel that same connection. So if you haven't yet, take a second to hit follow, write a quick review, or send your favorite episode to someone who would appreciate it. It's such a small thing, but it truly helps our neurodiversity affirming message reach more ears and hearts. All right, Viraj and Sumit are here with me next.
On a recent episode of the Neurodiversity Podcast.
One of the core and very tragic findings that we have found with the BGALS study, the Berkeley Girls with ADHD longitudinal study, by their teen years and early adult years, these girls, compared to a matched neurotypical comparison group, are at very high risk for self-injury, cutting, burning, so-called non-suicidal self-injury, and also frank suicide attempts. Girls may tend to internalize the negative feedback and the stigma, and with no one to talk to about it and feeling ashamed of their condition, they may not even know they have a condition called ADHD. We have to figure out the kinds of early interventions, and we've got some good evidence-based interventions that can prevent this very self-destructive course.
That's episode 278, Girls and ADHD. Find it on your favorite podcast platform.
Today, I have Viraj and Sumit Dhanda with me, a father-son team who are reshaping how we think about communication and non-speaking neurodivergent people. Viraj is the first non-speaking autistic student to be admitted to and attend MIT. He was diagnosed with autism and apraxia when he was young, and he learned to communicate through typing and has since shared his insights through poetry and essays featured by the Boston Globe, CBS Evening News, and NPR's Here and Now. His father, Sumit, is a finance professional and advocate who's held leadership roles in several major firms and now works alongside Viraj to promote greater understanding of non-speaking autistics. Together, they're co-authoring a memoir that explores their shared journey and challenges common assumptions about intelligence and communication. Before we start our conversation, Sumit, you have something you'd like to read. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is a poem that Viraj wrote in the 9th grade, just about 3 or 4 weeks after he was in the general education program. It's called Where I'm From. It goes like this. I'm from unopened presents, from hidden hopes and shattered dreams. I'm from the mother who left me and the father who won't, from the eye of the raging storm that hints at the promise of a rainbow at hand. I'm from autism and silence and hydrocephalus, from mighty odds and insurmountable obstacles. I'm from fatherly dedication and a caregiver's love, and from the graciousness of God. I'm from the prejudice of society and the insensitivity of teachers. I'm from the ignorance of the many and the wisdom of the few, from the kindness inside me that holds me in place, like the thread of the button that hangs from a coat. I'm from Sumit and Sujata, from Rachel and Olivia, from Bernarda and Shannon. I'm from New York City and Lady Liberty, from towering skyscrapers and sprawling parks, and immigrants in search of a dream. I'm from biryani and pizza, from pasta and ice cream, from smells that arouse the senses and tastes that excite the palate, the source of my nourishment that feeds my body, but not my impoverished mind. I'm from pretentious providers and vain administrators, the list of detractors that runs a mile long. I'm from resilience and perseverance, from failure and success, from heartache and triumph, the ultimate warrior, bloodied and weary, yet unbowed and standing proud. No more doubting me and no more hinting that my words are not my own.
I love that so much. I just have to kind of take a moment and reflect on it, because one of the things that is part of my passion is helping neurodivergent people be seen, be heard, be understood. And one of the biggest problems that we run into is that so many people still hold on to the myth that if somebody doesn't speak, it must mean that they don't think. And that misconception is just very damaging. And so, Sumit, I know you've talked a little bit about the importance of, non-speaking versus nonverbal, or those concepts, because those two are often confused. Could you share a little on your perspective on that distinction and why it matters so much for how people understand non-speaking autistic people?
Right. So speech is what I equate with non-speaking. So if you're non-speaking, it simply means you can't speak. Non-verbal has other connotations. It means that you lack language. And if you really boil it down to brain anatomy, and I'm no biologist, really speech and language are two different centers of the brain. Speech comes from the Broca's region. Language comes from the Wernicke's area. And you can have language without having speech. And therein lies the trouble, that we have a broad label called nonverbal, which, if you think about it, is suggesting that just because the person can't speak, they can't think, as you rightly pointed out. And it's, I think, just a fallacy which is so ingrained in institutions and schools with therapists, because there aren't that many counterexamples that exist to really defy this idea. But slowly, we're having alternative modes of communication show up. And that, I think, is starting to drive home the message that you can have language but not have speech. And there are other ways to express the language that's resident in your brain.
Mm-hmm. Exactly what you're talking about with how we understand this. And now that we have this technology, what we're really talking about here is apraxia, which has to do with motor planning. An easy way to understand this is that the brain and the body aren't really connecting and working the way people would expect. And so when somebody experiences speech apraxia, it has to do with formulating the words. And so how have you come to understand apraxia? And is there something that you would hope that parents or educators or clinicians would be able to understand about that so that they could better support non-speaking students?
Right. And apraxia is critical here. As you described it, one way to think about it is the engine's functioning, but there's no power being transmitted to the wheels. Or, you got an essay in your brain, but your printer's broken. And this is what's happening with these kids. They've got these well-formed thoughts. And because they've got apraxia, this motor sequencing disorder, which is so disruptive, somehow the nervous system is failing them. And they're unable to express their thoughts. And we walk away with this idea that because they can't express their thoughts, they're lacking in intellect. It goes back to the discussion we had earlier about how speech and language, along with that intellect, are two different parts of the brain. The other thing to keep in mind is, it presents itself in other ways throughout the body. You can have apraxia of speech, you can have motor apraxia, and Viraj has that in spades. And so, for example, even teaching him to type, we settled on using just one thumb because that was the extent of the manipulative ability he really had to be able to sort of beat the apraxia into submission. This concept is not alien to therapists. Speech therapists know about apraxia, but how it practically affects these kids and our impression of them is really the thing we need to focus on. There are a lot of studies out there about, how many non-speakers have apraxia of speech, and they aren't all exhaustive, but there's one from Penn State, for example, which says over 60% of such non-speakers have apraxia of speech. So just think about that for a second. Is this really a nonverbal autism as the way we describe it? Or is it just autism with apraxia of speech, which is really preventing these kids from expressing themselves in the way they're capable of?
Viraj, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Can you describe what life felt like before you had access to typing as a way to communicate?
Life was downright awful. What I hated most was being labeled mentally disabled. People thought I was behavioral because I flopped on the floor or used my body to communicate. But what was I supposed to do? I couldn't sign or speak. And I was desperate for the world to know I had a fully functional brain. I'd like Dad to read out a short piece I wrote in the 9th grade. It's written in the second person but captures the desperation I felt every day. It's called The Teacher.
All right, so here's how the teacher goes. You listen to her say he's stupid. He doesn't talk. You scream silently. You say you don't belong with the others. She says the description fits. You say the mold was broken when he made me. She feels empowered by her prejudices born of faulty knowledge. Even science plays second fiddle to her beliefs. You feel helpless and flail your arms in protest. This is how you express yourself. She calls it a behavior. You have just reinforced her belief. You feel the noose tighten around your neck. You are resigned to your fate. Your life reads like the label on the shampoo bottle. Lather, rinse, repeat.
I think that's really, that idea of those prejudices is so big, and people don't even realize it. I'm curious about what it was like the very first time you realized that typing could give you a way to communicate with the world. What was that moment like, and how did it change how you thought about yourself, your relationships, what you thought was possible for your future?
It felt liberating. Honestly, the simple dignity of having a voice was, at first, enough for me. Because with voice came respect. People no longer talked past me. They actually looked at me, acknowledged me, and spoke to me. Like they'd speak to a normal teenager, not a toddler. Life frustrations vanished, almost overnight, because now I could actually express myself. And my teachers and relatives finally understood that my outbursts had just been communication stuck behind a wall. The cherry on top was access to general education, and the possibility that I could attend college someday.
Mm-hmm. When you look back on your school years, what was it like moving from being in separate classrooms to being in that general education setting? I'm curious if there are any specific moments or experiences from that transition that stand out as especially meaningful to you.
It's hard to believe, but it felt like I was living the American dream. My version, of course. I finally had access to what I always wanted, and what every kid deserves, a meaningful education. I began with 4 subjects in the 9th grade: English, math, history, and physics. When I did well on an assignment or a test, I was filled with a sense of achievement, something that was previously missing from my life. I loved math, but it was writing that changed me. I found it to be truly cathartic. Giving voice to my frustrations really helped me become a calmer and better adjusted person. But there was also a sense of inadequacy I felt in front of my neurotypical peers. I typed slowly, and that made me self-conscious and anxious. And these are battles that I fight even today.
Being able to communicate does shift everything. And I think, Sumit, for you, I'm curious, parents of non-speaking kids, often when you enter the school system, there's this funnel effect. And you're told your child belongs in a separate classroom, or you're being pushed toward ABA as the only option, or hearing assumptions that their child will never be able to learn at grade level. And those messages can feel like a narrowing of a future before it's even begun. Can you share what it was like for you to face those pressures, and also how you kept the courage to continue to resist for Viraj to be included and for that door to be open for his growth?
It was hard because the constant refrain was, he belongs with all the other kids in a substantially separate classroom. And for people who don't know what that is, it's really for kids with either intellectual deficiencies or perceived as such, or significant behavioral problems, although I'm not a fan of the word. And every therapist, every educator, every doctor, every health professional I spoke to just said, look, there's really nothing we can do. Get him the services and hope for the best. And we did everything under the sun, and stuck with ABA for a long time. But, the first indication that there was something more came when he was 10, when a babysitter introduced him to AAC, augmentative communication, which is this device with just, icons on top of it. And you press an icon and the word gets spoken out loud. So you could press an icon for pizza and it gets spoken out loud. And Viraj really took to that quickly. I mean, there were teething pains, but he adapted quickly. So that was my first indication that maybe we're not doing the right thing for him in school. Maybe ABA is not the answer. But even then, the light bulb didn't really go off until he was 13 and he's watching the show and he can't speak. But this show called Super Y comes on, and these cartoon superheroes, are spelling out these words. And Viraj can't speak, but he can articulate half the letters of the English alphabet, just like that. That's his articulation of A. And so he spells a few letters of the word waterfall on. And I was just like, what happened? And that was my aha moment, after which, and then, one thing led to another. I taught him to type eventually. But that's when I started pushing the boundaries, questioning the school, questioning ABA, that as I understood how apraxia really prevents you from even pointing correctly, I was thinking to myself, well, so much of ABA involves pointing. And does him not being able to point really mean he doesn't know what a cat or a dog is because he can't pick it out from a grid of 4? And so I kept pushing. And once I taught him to type, the narrative completely switched around. And there's a whole backstory to this, which is more than a podcast, actually. But, that's when I was able to really go into the school and say, what do you think of them apples? I got him reevaluated. Neuropsych went from, the less than the first percentile to some categories were in the 99th. And again, we're lucky this happened to us. We were able to push through. But I want other parents to know that, look, if it could happen with Viraj, it can happen with your child too. You just have to keep your antennas up, keep pushing. It feels like you're hitting a brick wall every single time. But if you've got evidence, then the narrative will turn on the evidence.
Advocating for any child can be such an emotional roller coaster. There's a huge sense of loneliness and of isolation, and feeling like no one else really gets it. There's just the exhaustion from the persistence that it takes day after day to push against the system that is not really very responsive. But then, like you mentioned, you have those breakthroughs that really can help you keep going. But it takes a real toll, especially when that progress feels so slow or even sometimes invisible. How have you handled that journey? And what has really sustained you through those harder stretches?
Well, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't exhausting and isolating. I was doing this as a single parent. One thing I did learn was to ask other parents with special needs kids for help, because they are the most helpful bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Your family may not understand what you're going through. Your friends may not understand quite what we're going through. But a special needs parent is always willing to give his or her time and help you out. So there was, I can't say I had other people advocate for Viraj, but I tried to reach out to other special needs parents to see, for example, when that super why moment happened, I reached out to a whole community of parents, like, where do I go with this, right? And like you said, progress can seem excruciatingly slow. And then it can happen in a burst. It can be episodic almost, like it happened with Viraj. And that's where you got to push. The sad reality is parents and school districts, by and large, tend to be antagonistic, right? Mm-hmm. School districts are like, this is what is appropriate for a child. And parents are like, nope, I think my son or my daughter deserves a lot more. And we work with that similar dynamic. It was always a frustrating tug of war. One thing that helped us, especially when Viraj broke into general education, and I'm not saying this is easy to do, we had advocacy from the inside, right? Early on, the head of science at his high school, I reached out, he was open, and he helped change a lot of minds internally when he saw what Viraj was capable of. Later on, when we switched schools, switched to Fusion Academy, Jessica Petchol, the school principal, I talked to her about the kind of support that Viraj would need. And some of these asks weren't easy. And she was like, okay, we'd love to be able to support the child. So I think, you've got to pick your battles. You've got to keep on keeping on. And you can't let it get to you. And I know it's easier said than done because I lived that life. But I think the breakthroughs sustain you. You reach out to a network that exists. You reach out to teachers or educators or therapists who might be sympathetic to your cause, and you build evidence, right? Every day that Viraj, I would shoot videos of, look, this is what he can do, and look at the progress he's making, and the breakthrough happened in COVID, and I would send those videos to the administrative officials in the school district, like, can we please give this child a chance? And sometimes there'll be no response, and sometimes there'll be a response. And it didn't matter to me. I just kept pressing. And ultimately, the dam broke.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that moment when the dam broke. What was that like when all of a sudden, all of these things started to kind of come aligned and you saw this progress and you saw an environment that was supportive of Viraj as a parent? I imagine that must have just been overwhelming.
Yeah, there's like all these different moments are just frozen in time for me. I have such a clear recollection of that IEP meeting when I walked in. He had a great neuropsych report. The neuropsych was on the call. His IEP team was on the call. I hadn't had success before that. I thought, oh my God, here I am heading to another gunfight. And like I mentioned, the head of science was already an advocate internally, and he'd spoken to teachers internally. And it just was a pleasant surprise at the end of the day. The neuropsych said her piece, and Ed, who was the teacher, the high school science head, said, hey, I'm teaching Viraj physics honors 1-on-1 this year. I mean, and then the rest of the IEP team had really nothing to say, because that would have looked so awkward in some ways about really, look, the head of science for high school is teaching him physics 1-on-1, and we're not offering him math and English, right? So, it was just, like I said, it was just surreal at some sense, and felt like everything I'd fought for months and months just suddenly crystallized.
Yeah, I love that. Viraj, now that you've kind of gone through this, you've chosen MIT for college. So what are the things that excite you the most about that? And what are the areas of study and passions that you're really looking forward to learning about and exploring while you're there?
I'd be lying if I said it had nothing to do with the prestige and the quality of education. But there was another aspect to it. The university's commitment to disability inclusivity really resonated with me. And, unlike most places, MIT boasts a long list of graduates that reflects this commitment. Also, of all the colleges I researched, MIT was the only one that valued personal qualities and character above all else. This was my calling card, and I figured it would matter at MIT. Luckily, I guessed right. At MIT, I'm excited about making new friends, something that has always been hard for me given my disability. I'm thrilled that I will be able to challenge my mind. And that I will have the opportunity to learn from the best, including my professors and my peers. I haven't quite decided on my major, but I'm leaning toward economics, and perhaps a minor in political science.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. When you think back on your experience, Viraj, what are some of the most important ways that schools could rethink their expectations and opportunities for non-speaking students so that they really do feel included and respected and also challenged to reach whatever goals they might have?
I want to start with an overused phrase in special education: presume competence. But here's the dirty little secret. Everyone loves to use it, yet very few educators truly put it into practice, especially when it comes to non-speaking autistics. If I'm living proof of anything, it is that silence isn't stupidity. Remember, a significant fraction of non-speakers, like me, have apraxia of speech, which prevents us from speaking. That doesn't mean we can't think. So, if you're an educator or a therapist, when you speak to non-speakers, don't be patronizing. Avoid the toddler talk and microaggressions you unconsciously lapse into. Don't just automatically assume an intellectual ceiling. Also, to the school districts, please don't make parents fight for accommodations or services that look reasonable, but don't meet conventional guidelines. Trust me, sometimes parents know better.
Yeah. I think that's a hard thing sometimes for people to hear. I'm a mental health clinician and I am an educator. And when I have clients who come into my office, recognizing that we're so narrow-minded sometimes about what we assume communication really is. And I love the way that you have shared your story and continue to share your story. So Viraj, as we wrap up our conversation, I have one last question. If you could send a message directly to other non-speaking autistic kids who might feel invisible right now, what would you tell them? What encouragement or advice would you want them to hear from someone who has been in their shoes?
I would like to leave them with a message of hope. I know it looks bleak, but there's a way out. Trust that your parents or your teacher will find the key that unlocks your mind. To their parents, I'd say believe in your kids. Explore alternate modes of communication, like the ones that worked for me. I'd tell them to read our upcoming memoir, where Dad and I lay out how we cracked it all open. It may not work exactly for your child, but it might give you an idea of how to proceed without having to reinvent the wheel. Finally, I think the great big hope for non-speakers is the evolution in communication technology. Today, we rely on text-based tools. But the tomorrow is about converting thoughts to speech. It's about speech prosthetics, a technology that I believe could someday allow non-speakers to rejoin the world that once left them behind.
Yeah, I love that. I know that there's a lot of emerging technology, which is amazing, and I'm so excited to see it. Sumit, tell us a little bit more about the memoir as we wrap up.
Yeah, so it's written in my voice, but it's got a lot of Viraj's writings in there. He's obviously helped shape the manuscript. It talks about our journey, and the hope is, it inspires people. It gives people a way to model their own child's journey, their own journey. It talks in detail about what worked, why it worked, what didn't work, why it didn't work. And, it wasn't a straight line forward. It was a path that was woven with obstacles literally every step of the way. And, you know, it seems hard, but I think we've just been given this lot in life where, for lack of a better description, we have to learn to power through it. It comes with great sacrifice. And that doesn't, mean that other parents don't make sacrifices. They all do. But it just requires an inordinate level of commitment and sacrifice, because you're not just trying to help your child. You're fighting the world. You're trying to change minds. There are entrenched stereotypes that you're trying to shake. And unfortunately, you can't do it just by talk. You have to do it through evidence, persistence. It's all of the above. And again, one of the messages that the memoir tries to send is, look, through everything we went through, if there's one message you can take away, it's that this blanket label of intellectually challenged or disabled that we apply to non-speaking autistics, at the very least, drop that label.
Sumit and Viraj Dhanda, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
There are so many voices we don't hear, not because they're silent, but because we haven't yet learned how to listen. Viraj's story reminds us that communication doesn't always look like words spoken aloud. Sometimes it's movement or typing or an expression that doesn't fit our usual expectations, and it's easy to overlook what's really happening beneath the surface. For educators and families, the challenge is to look beyond what's easy to measure and notice what's actually there. When we approach students with curiosity instead of assumptions, we start to see their capabilities more clearly. And once we see that potential, we can't unsee it. It changes the way we teach, the way we support, and the way we think about learning itself. Every time we expand our idea of what communication can look like, we open one more door for someone to be understood. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
I try to figure out who I am. Not sure what I'm doing here. And the days don't work out the way I thought they would. And before you, there was no one who understood. Never found somewhere I fit in. Until I met you, I was feeling lost. But you're the one who can make it go away. All you have to do is look at me. Sometimes I can't breathe, but it feels like you're the one who saves me. When I try, but don't succeed. Yeah, it feels like you're the one who saves me. The one who saves me.
A really enjoyable conversation with Sumit and Viraj. We appreciate them joining us, and if you'd like more information, check out the show notes for links. Also, we would really appreciate if you'd check to see if the app or platform where you listen allows reviews or ratings. And if it does, please leave one. It really helps people find us and helps them to know what to expect when they do. If you do this favor for us, I will not ask for another favor for probably weeks, if not days. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Corey Orrick is our office manager and production assistant. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Sometimes I can't see, but it feels like you're the one who saves me.
This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance,